On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Prabhath Karanth. He is the CISO at Navan. We're going to be talking about the security function, the growth of the security function, especially how it's interacting with engineering and the technology side. And PK has been a part of a couple of great organizations. He's seen this growth and evolution. I'm excited to have him on the show. PK, thanks for being on.
Thanks, Amir. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. I guess, I know you're the CISO, so I think that is kind of self-explanatory for everyone in terms of what you do. But the company, Navan, tell us what you guys do.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, folks. This is Prabhath Karanth, PK. I run the security and trust function here at Navan. So Navan is an all-in-all travel and expense management SaaS platform with over 10,000 customers and over 3,000 users. Our simple mission is to make travel simple, travel simplified. So it's a completely modernized, kind of stack for travel and payments. And we have customers ranging from, Fortune 100 companies to, kind of mid-range organizations, late-stage startups, and so on and so forth. So for every sector in the market, we want to cater that. Yeah.
So I guess we're going to be talking about, I think before we were mentioning off air, we're talking about the growth and security in terms of being more engineering oriented, how security is scaling and how it's taking on some of those functions. Everything's becoming as a code, your relationship with technology. Maybe let's start at a high level, just to understand your team and where it kind of sits, obviously in relation to, your other peers, and kind of go from there.
Sounds good. So let's take a step back, right? So I've been fortunate enough to work in, a couple of organizations that have gone through hypergrowth. Prior to Navan, I was with Adobe. I almost spent a decade at Adobe, where during my tenure, the business grew from $30 million to $300 billion. The employee count grew from 7,000 to 30,000 folks. But more importantly, the business transformed at Adobe. Like I kind of joined at a juncture where the business had decided to move to the cloud and embrace the cloud technology. So for a company at that scale to move from selling shrink wrap on-prem software to the cloud, it was a massive transformation. So what that meant is on the security side, you had to completely reimagine the way you kind of structured the team and planned for growth and forecasted how things need to go, right, along with the business. So long story short, of course, alignment with engineering is super important, but more importantly, you need to align with the business strategy and the business, the business goals, right? And then because the engineering organization is so the business goals translate into product goals translate into engineering goals. So as a security leader, you have to make sure that you keep a close pulse of that, and then, kind of organize your function, skill sets, people, tooling to align with that. Similarly, the story in Navan, again, I've gone through some hypergrowth here in the last couple of years, the way this company has grown and disrupted our industry overall. So the common observation here is that of course, a lot of, security practices are moving to, security as a code. It could be detection as a code, or it could be, your shift left as a code in your overall application security development lifecycle. But more importantly, I think the critical aspect is to align with these technologies. Like what I mean by that is move, like on-prem to cloud was one shift. Prior to that, I'm sure internet was things. That was the first wave of technology. Then cloud was another wave. I feel like we're going through another wave right now, which is the AI piece, right? Which is not new, but it's just being embraced in a completely different way in this year. So it becomes critical. So the way I think about it is part of my organization, which is one of the most critical parts of the security pillar, is the product platform security, which works very closely with the product leaders, engineering leaders, making sure how security is baked into the software development lifecycle, into the product, making sure whatever we ship to production is, kind of free of vulnerabilities, and we have the mechanisms to identify, detect, and respond. And also, once things are pushed to production, then at runtime to detect, any deviations from the desired state, and then actually remediate that. And the other key pillar that is that the way I think about it is the part of the security organization. I call it detection and response, but it's a combination of detection, engineering, response, enterprise security. So this takes care of all the IT security side of the house, things like email security, endpoint scanning, endpoint detection and response, malware detection, all of that. And then also the detection engineering function, which actually works continuously to build detections as a code so that we have the right alerting criteria for my incident response team to identify anomalies and respond to that in a timely fashion to meet customer commitments. And the last pillar, so I think about this in three main buckets. I covered two. The last pillar I think about is the GRC and the trust function. So this is governance, risk, and compliance in the trust function. And everything else kind of falls in this bucket. This is more customer focused, customer aligned. All the compliance certifications, third-party risk management, business continuity, data governance, data security, policy. And then the other part of that function is to communicate this story to customers and prospects, because security has become such an important part of the overall go-to-market strategy lately. So this is how I categorize it in my mind. But then again, you want to customize this template based on the business that you're running security for, based on the product vision, based on the engineering vision. Yeah.
So as you're kind of, seeing, obviously, I appreciate the explanation. I think is a great overview. As you're kind of looking at your team, there are some emerging technologies that you probably, is on the radar. You have existing technologies. You see other teams are at a certain point in their maturation with other technologies. So obviously you probably find yourself, or do you find yourself trying to figure out, your technology roadmap? Do you typically work with other leaders to kind of fit within their roadmap, or how do you actually, build that component out?
Yeah, so for me, the way I think about it is always business first, right? So whatever roadmap I'm building needs to be aligned with the business roadmap, and also the technology roadmap that's aligned with the business roadmap. So I keep a close pulse of all the product GMs and engineering VPs and overall the go-to-market, even our kind of go-to-market leaders like our CRO and his direct reports in terms of what customers are expecting, how that translates into, kind of business objectives, how that translates into product objectives, and how that translates into engineering and technology objectives, right? So when you combine all of this, it becomes much easier to formulate a very pragmatic roadmap and a strategy for a security team. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of, kind of relationships to maintain and kind of distill all this information to my leadership team and, the security staff in terms of how to translate this into our roadmap and strategy. But I think that's what security leadership job is about, right? So that's how I think about this. Yeah.
So you mentioned about AI. Obviously, you wear the CISO hat. I know you've done a lot of work with privacy trust. Everybody on earth wants to use ChatGPT or some form of it. I don't know. Does that cause consternation? Is that on your radar to deal with, or is it how do you deal with it if it is on your radar?
Of course, it's definitely on the radar. I think we as a company have embraced AI in a very big way, and that's one of the reasons why the product is that great, right? And ChatGPT is an example of all these technologies, but the technology is great. I think that's why it's captured so much attention. It's just technology is just good. That's period, right? And everybody wants to use it, and it works. So yes. So the way I think about it is this happened. I distinctly remember in late. Around 2009, 10-ish, right? When the cloud technology came in and when AWS was just building services and all of that, the technology was just good. Everybody wanted to embrace it, but there was a lot of reluctance at that point, which went away. Gradually as the technology developed, that reluctance went away, right? Not just from the private, even from the public sector, governments and all of that, right? I'm seeing that reluctance go away. I feel like something very similar is going to happen in this AI space, right? Right now, the technology is so new. There are some risk-averse, entities that want a closer grip, or maybe need to understand more before they can go full out and adopt this technology. But I feel as a security leader, of course, I need to be, kind of very risk appropriate, risk cautious, risk averse. But at the same time, when you can clearly see that some technology is going to get adopted in a big, massive way, you got to embrace it and figure out what does it mean for security. How can you manage that risk from, just to give you some examples, from a legal privacy perspective, from a product adoption perspective, and what does it mean to our customer segments, right? What does it mean to, say, customers in the EU? How does it translate to GDPR? So yeah, I think, of course, it's the same kind of a template that I had to think about during the cloud adoption days, but it's something that me and my team had to be on top of right away when the business made the decision, right? I don't think we have an option to block it. The only option is to embrace it and figure out how to manage the risk and make sure we're doing the right things on behalf of our customers. Yeah.
It's interesting because I found a product called Chat PDF. So it's an interface that lets you drop a PDF into the AI, and I think ChatGPT is behind the scenes, and then you can deal with the PDF. You can talk to the PDF, which is interesting. I use it sometimes to get some summaries of transcripts from the show, and it's kind of helpful to kind of bring some salient points out and talking points. But I was thinking about you and security, and I'm like, geez, could you imagine if anyone can drop a PDF to get a summary? No one knows what happens to the ownership of these documents. I'm putting it on some public service. It seemingly is free. So you're like, oh, it's free. And I know, obviously, you don't want proprietary information being put out there to be summarized. I mean, how do you start formulating a strategy for that? Because it's so easy and it's so tempting to go, I drop this in, I don't have to read a 60-page PDF. It'll give me a summary of 8 bullet points in 3 minutes.
No, I think that's where it requires a very, very close partnership with when the business is planning to productize some of this stuff, it's extremely critical to have a very, very close, you got to be tied to the hip with the product leadership, right? So that you can give them the security and privacy requirements that are driven by regulations and customer asks and customer commitments, and so that they can bake it into whatever they are shipping, right? So there are several ways to deal with it. I think you don't have to, to give you a simple example, in some cases, without divulging too much into the proprietary information, but in some cases, when you're actually sending this data to a service like that, in some cases, you can just send the metadata, right? And then build your internal AI engine, which is hosted in your own infrastructure to do the analysis, not that third-party service, right? So that's one example, but there are several mechanisms that you can actually implement to make sure that the security and the privacy obligations are upheld. Similarly, when it comes to the development practices, right? There are a unique set of risks now. I mean, you spoke about engineering earlier, but the overall engineering practices in terms of writing code, the efficiency around writing code, the developer productivity, I feel like that whole segment is going to get disrupted so much, which technologies like GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT in the future. There again, as a product security organization, you got to really think, what does it mean from a threat model perspective, right? There are kind of new risks, like we're talking about SQL injection, but now there are things like prompt injection, intent injection. Will the AI model, even if you're hosting it internally, will that surface information for customer A and not for customer B? What kind of protections do we have in place to do that, right? So this whole game around design review, threat model, business logic review in pure application terms, application security context changes, right? So I gave you a few examples. I can go on and on about it, but this is what I kind of live and breathe and I think about with my leadership team. But that's just the reality, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. As you mentioned with the AWS component, you're starting to see this play out and map out. And I guess when you're looking at AWS, it's a service, it's in the cloud. There was some, is it safe? Is it not? With this, and how widespread it's growing in terms of thought, and even if it's an internal proprietary product, you have to. Are you thinking about how the users, I guess, customers, when they use, let's say, an AI tool, how they could inadvertently introduce something into the model because they're feeding information into the product and the way they're using it, I mean, they could potentially start including, nefarious intents for that information. Is that something that comes up, or is that just way far-fetched and we're not even worried about it yet?
No, it does come up. It does come up. I think that's where that's where certain mechanisms will need to be built, right? Say if a customer doesn't want to use this technology, then we need to give that option, right? In terms of how they can opt out of it. And then also things like, if you look at ChatGPT I'll give you a simple example, okay? ChatGPT, the technology, I've been listening to their CEO speak and all of that, right? They are thinking about this. The higher versions of ChatGPT, they're thinking about it. One of the things that he talks about is especially they are worried about this technology being used for like offensive cyber attacks, right? And they are building mechanisms where this intent is curved to the maximum extent possible. So if you try and feed ChatGPT any information around, anything related to offensive cybersecurity or trying to hack something, right? The response is a polite no. Okay, so that's a clear, kind of indication of how you need to think about intent and how that translates into customer workflows. So when you're adopting that technology into product workflows and internal workflows, you got to think about it from the same lens, right? You got to actually think about it in the same lens in terms of what does it mean from a customer perspective. You got to think from their lens. And sometimes you got to think beyond their, kind of very standard lens too, right? What about an edge case for an intent may look like, and how can we protect against that? What does it mean from a product? So there's several things that goes into it, Amir. Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be an emerging new position in companies to deal with that? Like it's obviously there might be, and I'm just not aware of it, but it seems like you're going to need someone to actually go through and model different scenarios, use cases to actually test against. Obviously, we do, the companies have testing, but this is a whole different type of testing, like testing AI and fringe cases. Is that something that's emerging? Is it already here? Or, what are your thoughts?
Great question. All right. So I had this question, to be honest, in the first half of January, and I'm like, why is nobody not building a company yet, right? So fortunately, I don't want to name vendors in this podcast, but if somebody's interested, feel free to reach out. But there has been some movement, right? So I have been some movement around companies that are building to scan the data models, to scan the configuration, to also, there are some other things in the roadmap, like even in one step further to go look at the intent and what does that mean around the regulations that govern this whole ecosystem, right? So very promising kind of thought leadership that's going on here. But this is going to come out in a big way. Like for example, when the data security posture management space got created, right? There were a couple of companies. This is like 2 or 3 years back, but today there are 15 companies, right? I foresee something like that absolutely happening in this domain. I feel like if we're doing the same podcast a year from now, there'll be at least 10 companies doing this. So it's coming. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure to include your LinkedIn so that somebody can reach out to you to pick your brain. Hey, I know you're busy. I know we're getting to the end of our time, but I wanted to say, PK, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing super interesting insights. I can't thank you enough.
Awesome, Amir. Thanks for having me. This was great. Have a good weekend.
You too. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guests, different day. And until then, hey, if you like the podcast, share it with somebody else that might like it. Subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review wherever you are listening to it. I appreciate all that kind of stuff. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.